The selected paper title is Processing a Second Language, Late Learners' Comprehension Mechanisms as Revealed by Event-Related Brain Potentials, ERPs. This paper used ERPs to study the processing mechanisms underlying the comprehension of spoken sentences in late L2 learners. The purpose of choosing ERP's technique was to provide differential markers for semantic processes N400, early anterior negativity, and late syntactic processes P600. The participants were 12 native speakers of Japanese. All of them are right-handed. They were undergraduates labeled as late L2 learners living in Germany for 29 months on average. The comparison was made between L2 participants and native listeners. The material was adopted from a previous study with native speakers. The designed material were 4 different types of sentences: correct, syntactically incorrect, semantically incorrect, and a combination of syntactically and semantically incorrect sentences. In the study of using the same sentences in native listeners, the researchers found an N400 effect for the critical sentence final word in the semantically incorrect condition. In the experiment of performing syntactic condition, which referred to the violation of the phrase structure of the sentence, a modulation of the early anterior negativity followed by a P600 effect was elicited from the condition of L1 group. The combination of syntactic and semantic violation produced similar ERP's pattern. When participants listened to correct and incorrect sentences, which were different between L2 learners and native listeners as a function of sentence type, the researchers observed the registered ERPs. While processing correct sentences, there was significant difference between the two groups in the late time range. The data from the native listeners showed P600 effects. The data of the late L2 learners displayed greater positivity than the native listeners. The observed effect tended to be more over the right hemisphere than the other one. The brain sites included anterior and posterior regions. The P600 has been found, and they interpreted this to be difficulties with processes of syntactic integration. The paper authors borrowed an unpublished research result to support their suggestion that there could be 2 different types of subprocesses of the P600. It was a very plausible assumption that the differences in amplitude observed for the correct sentences between the 2 groups demonstrated an increased difficulty in syntactic integration processes in the late L2 learners compared to the native group. It was also suggested that hemispheric differences were existential for 2 subcomponents of the P600, so that the 2 sub-effects might share certain similarity to the L1 and L2 acquisition differences. However, those speculative assumptions need more further research studies to be tested. As for the N400 component for semantic violations in L2 learners, it was also detected. The effect showed a right hemispheric distribution but was significant for left posterior region. They found statistic evidence to prove that semantic integration processes were very similar in L1 and L2 processing because N400 effect did not show any significant differences across the 2 groups. Besides, an extended N400 effect was observed, indicating that the participants were engaged in a brain activity that was trying to integrate words into the prior context longer than native group. That implied the participants' uncertainty about vocabulary knowledge and use. Another result from their research suggested that the late processes were also different between L2 and L1 listeners because of their lack of the P600 modulation. Their interpretations were 2 ways. One was the absence of the late syntactic repair processes for the incorrect sentences, and the other was some kind of flower effect. The final point I would like to quote from the paper is that the left prefrontal cortex observed the processing of lexicosemantic information. However, the right prefrontal cortex supported the processing of conceptual semantic information. That's all. Thank you for your time.